And now they're in this situation. Why would the Lord not help them in this situation? In fact, what is their complaint? What did they say against the Lord? Well, did the Lord just bring us out here to kill us? Right? That we can die in the desert? That's the question they're asking. And, well, no, it's actually, that's ridiculous. Because I am the Lord who heals you. This is who the Lord is. And he should be faithful. And so, I shouldn't say he should be, he is faithful. He is faithful, and because he is faithful, we should trust him. Right? And I say we should trust him because we've all been in desperate situations, right? Right? Everybody could nod, yeah, I know, it's true. We've all been in desperate situations, and what do we tend to do in desperate situations? All those things, right? Panic. Worry, complain, do things we shouldn't do, right? Seek comfort or escape in things that we shouldn't seek comfort and escape in. Right? Those are things that we do, even God's people, right? Even those of us who have been baptized into the Lord Jesus Christ and washed in the blood, we still panic, we still despair. All those things are true. And so I think that what we have to learn is to trust the Lord. And so God doesn't put that lesson off for us. As soon as we come into the kingdom, the Lord begins to teach us that lesson to trust him. And that's why it's usually when I study with somebody and have the pleasure of baptizing somebody, usually the first thing I tell them is, look, in fact, I usually tell them this before they were baptized. Right? Anybody here I've baptized on Travis, you and I probably had this conversation. Because I'm like, look, here's what's going to go down, right? This is what's coming, because we have to be prepared for the fact that the Lord is going to allow our trust in him to be tested. It has to be. It has to be so that we can not only just grow in our strength of our faith, but so that we can know him. So we can know that we can trust him. Because see what the Lord does here at the end of chapter 15 is that he does give them water, right? He gives them water, he gives them the tree, the water becomes bitter, but then he takes them to a place, it says, then they came to Elim where there were 12 springs and 70 date palms, and they camped there by the water. This is what they were looking for. This is the oasis. This is paradise. Plenty of water, plenty of food, they can be taken care of. God is caring for them because I am the God who heals you. But they were tested. So it's not all testing. It's not all hard times. I'm sure this place, Elim, was probably pretty nice. Lots of water, lots of food, and they camped here for a while. Okay. So now, in chapter 16, verse 1, says the entire Israelite community, or some of your translations might say the whole congregation, which is all the people. Right? The whole congregation departed from Elim, and they came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had left the land of Egypt. So they have been away from Egypt for a while now. Okay? And they're on the move. They're going towards the promised land. But they have to go through this wilderness of sin. And it's an interesting word, an interesting name, this wilderness of sin, because oftentimes locations are named after people, right? We're pretty familiar with that. We have Gough Avenue. We're on Gough Avenue. I'm sure Gough, or sorry, some guy named Gough that was around, and this street got named after some guy named Gough. Or you go through subdivisions a lot of times, and there'll be names of somebody's family members as they're putting together the subdivision. And, we'll have Jefferson Street and Washington Street and Lincoln Avenue and all those things. And we even have Washington, D.C. So our places are associated with names. And so this name here, Sin, is actually interesting because it comes through the languages of the Near East, and this place is really named after the idol, which would have been like the moon goddess or the goddess of fertility. And so this place that they're going into is actually kind of like Egypt. Egypt was controlled by the gods of Egypt, and Pharaoh was a representative. And so here now they're going into this wilderness. Well, this wilderness, who possesses it? There's another idol, another foreign god, right? And so they go into this place, and this place is very desolate. And once again in verse 2 it says, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Right? It's like, come on, man. We were, don't you remember what happened when we just came through the sea? We went into the desert, there wasn't any water. And then we got this place here where we've got springs, we got trees, we got everything we need right here. Why don't we just stay right here? Okay? And what would be it? Why are they not staying right there? I mean, why don't they stay in this place called Elim, where they've got plenty of water? And they've got date palms. They're being led. They're being led by the Lord. Because why did the Lord bring them out of Egypt? To fulfill his promise. Right? They have a destination. Their destination is not this comfortable place that they were at, as nice as it may be. And as fulfilling as it may be to be there, they have a different destination that the Lord is leading them to, which is in line with his promise. There are greater things that the Lord has in store for them. However, in order to get there, they have to go through the wilderness, the desert, which, once again, is going to be hard. It's going to be testing. And right away, chapter 16, verse 2, it says, the entire Israelite community grumbles against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And they grumble against Moses, and they grumble against Aaron, but why are they grumbling against these guys? I mean, why would they grumble against these guys? Because are these guys the ones leading them? What's that?
They think of Moses as almost a god. Because he led them out of Egypt.
Well,
In their minds.
yeah. Well, he's certainly important in their minds, right?
They could
Yeah.
see him.
They could see Moses. They could see Aaron. But they could see the pillar in the cloud also, right? And because who is it that's leading them? It's the Lord, right? The Lord is leading them to the land of Canaan. But rather than think about that, rather than focus on the fact that they're being led by the Lord who heals you, they grumble. And they say, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt. Wow. Look at that statement. Is that the Lord who heals them, the Lord who has brought them out of slavery, the Lord who's going to give them this promised land, what are they accusing him of? Yeah, man, he's abandoning us. And it would have been better if he just killed us when we were in Egypt, rather than being out here in this desert. And once again, having been in the Sinai, it's miserable. I can understand why these people would feel this way. But God, why don't you just kill me? And that's a pretty common human reaction also, I think, to suffering and to testing and discomfort, discouragement. Because many people probably feel, well, Lord, why don't you just take me? I don't want to do this anymore. Even though we know we're being led by the Lord. If we had only died in the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Remember Egypt? Remember how great Egypt was? Remember all the food we had? Remember the steaks? The potatoes? Right? All the bread? There's some places you go, like you go to a restaurant, they give you that bread. Like you go to Texas Roadhouse, that bread, man, that's good stuff. Peanuts, I like the peanuts too. But remember all this good stuff? I mean, wasn't Egypt great? Wasn't Egypt great? It's so easy to forget, right? It's so easy to forget how bad it really was when they were crying out to the Lord and asking the Lord to come and take them out of Egypt. And so, if only we had died in the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt when we sat by the pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, you brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger. Right? I mean, what are they saying by making that statement?
You're not just stating the fact that we're out here dying of hunger. You have the reason we're out here dying for
All right. It's your fault. Right? It's the Lord's fault. If the Lord's going to kill you, the Lord should have just killed us. The Lord should have just killed us when we were sitting next to a pot of meat, rather than dragging us out here and making us miserable first and then killing us. He should have just put us out of our misery then. And so, when they do this, they'll remember the Lord said, I am the Lord who heals you. So what else are they doing by making this statement? They're calling God evil, right? They are calling God a liar, which couldn't be anything further from the truth. No, He is Yahweh, Almighty. He is the one who heals. He is the one who provides. And so everything they're accusing Him of is not only short-sighted, but it's the exact opposite of the truth. So really what they're doing here is they're blaspheming. This is what blasphemy is. Blasphemy is when you essentially call God a liar and say, God is not true. God is not real. The things that God says are never going to happen. That's why Jesus says the only sin that can never be forgiven is the sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit. And the reason is that how can God forgive you when you call God a liar? In fact, God can't forgive you when you call God a liar, because if I say God's a liar, God doesn't save anybody, Jesus is false, and I don't want anything to do with it. Well, what have I just done? And if I say that, what have I just done?
self-exile.
Yeah, I have self-exiled. I have separated myself from God. I said to God, God's a liar. God's not true. Anything that God promises is false. I don't want any part of it. You can have it. See you later. Bye. So I have just separated myself from God. And in fact, this is what most of humanity does, actually. Most of humanity essentially says God is a liar. God is false. The Bible is false. Jesus is false. The church is false. I don't want anything to do with it. And by doing that, you have separated yourself from God. For eternity, by the way. You have separated yourself from the source of life. You have separated yourself from the one who heals you. That's why C.S. Lewis says that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Right? Because we separate ourselves from God. And the door is locked from the inside. So the people here are falling trap to this. And by the way, this is also what the enemy does to us. The enemy gets us to, rather than think about who God is and be thankful for what God has done for us, and to hope in God and to trust in God, the enemy will try to get us to focus on our immediate circumstances that are difficult, our immediate circumstances where we might feel pain, our immediate circumstances where we might be pushed around by the world, and say, what kind of God does that to you? Right? What kind of Savior do you have that's leaving you hanging like that? How can God be true if that's what you're going through? And so this is where the enemy tries to get us. The enemy tries to get us to get our mind in this place to where we say, you know what, you're right. It would have been better for me to never step through those doors. It would have been better for me to just off myself before I ever became a Christian. Which is an absolute lie. It's 180 degrees from the truth. But that's where the enemy tries to get us, so that he can get us to turn away from the living God and separate ourselves from him. And so we see here the people just thinking about the pots of meat, thinking about how great it was, when in fact, no, in Egypt they were miserable. Just like Paul says, is that when we are separated from God, we're dead in our transgressions and sins. And Paul says in Romans, why would you want to go back to the things that lead to death? Why would you want to go back to the things that you know were killing you? Just like the Egyptians here, why would they want to go back? Well, because they're a little hungry. Right? Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. This way I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. Okay, so once again here, the Lord is going to provide for them. The Lord understands their situation, but this is a test. And what's the test? Okay, are we going to listen to the Lord? Okay. Are we going to listen to the Lord, or do we think we're smarter than God? All right, pretty simple test. Okay. So this way I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, this evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Right? It's interesting that he's saying this to them. It's like, okay, tonight you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. Right? Remember, the Lord had said, you will know that I am the Lord. Well, now you'll know that I am. Okay, tonight you'll know that it was the Lord. Right? If you didn't get it before, you're going to get it now. Okay? Hopefully. You'll know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the Lord's glory because he has heard your complaints about him. Right? Remember, they're grumbling against Moses, but really they're complaining about the Lord. For who are we that you complain about us? Right? Even Moses is saying this. Why are you complaining about us? It's not us who's giving you this word. It's from the Lord. And so Moses continued, the Lord will give you meat to eat this evening and all the bread you want in the morning, for he has heard the complaints that you are raising against him. Who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. As Aaron was speaking to the entire Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there was a cloud, and the Lord's glory appeared. And the Lord spoke to Moses and says, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. And tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. And then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Okay, so God is answering their complaint. I will take care of it. You will have meat. You will have bread. Just like you wanted back in Egypt. Right? So at evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew all around the camp. And when the layer of dew evaporated, there were fine flakes on the desert surface, as fine as frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. And then Moses told them, it is bread. It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each person needs to eat, and you may take 2 quarts per individual, according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. So here's the bread, here's the meat that they wanted, and the Lord gives them instructions on how to gather it. Go out and gather. My translation says 2 quarts. I think the word that's actually used in Hebrew is omer. But it's about half a gallon. Right? Or if you think of like a 2-liter bottle of soda, that's how much they would be gathering. And so they're told exactly what to do. They're given instructions. And once again, this is a test from the Lord to see if they would follow instructions. And so the Israelites did this. Okay? Now, some gathered a lot, some gathered a little. And when they measured it by quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus. And the person who gathered a little had no shortage. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat. And Moses said, no one is to let any of it remain until morning. Okay? So these are the instructions, once again. Gather what you need, and as the scripture says, everyone had exactly what they needed, but they didn't listen to Moses. Right? So here's the crux of the matter. Right? And you can see the temptation would be when you're in this desert where there is no game, there is no food, there is no water, what's the temptation going to be? Well, I'm going to get as much as I can, right? Because we never know if we don't know if we're going to see this again. And I'm going to try and store it up for myself. Even though the Lord had given them specific instructions not to do that. And so they didn't listen to Moses. Some people left part of it until morning, and it bred worms, and it stank. Therefore Moses was angry with them. I can't imagine you think you scored a huge amount of food here, and then you wake up in the morning, just try to imagine it'd be really gross. You got this pot, and they probably didn't have like clear glass pots like we would think of. They probably had some clay jar. And then you take the top off of it, and then you just got this rotten smell that hits you. And then there's just stuff crawling down at the bottom of it. It would be really gross. But, I mean, you'd be grossed out, but what else would you be? Well, you're being disobedient, but how would you feel if you got up in the morning, you thought you scored this huge basket of food, and then you take the top off of that stuff, and it's all gross and full of worms? How are you going to feel? You're going to be mad, right? You're going to be like, doggone it. I thought I had food for weeks. And look at this. It's all gross. That's really disappointing. So it made me think about sometimes when you kill a deer and then you go to butcher your deer and then you go to take the skin off your deer and start taking the deer's parts apart, and then you'll discover parts of your deer where maybe a deer had an infection or was wounded or something like that, and it's just all rotten, and you're just like, oh man, I can't eat this. Right? It's just really disappointing. And in this situation, it'd be even more disappointing because there is no more food anywhere. There is no other source of food. They didn't listen to Moses. Now Moses is getting angry with them. And you can imagine, if you're in Moses' shoes, and you've probably felt this way before, if you're ever in charge of something, and you tell somebody, okay, here's the job for the day. We're going to do this, this, and this, okay? And then you say, go and do, right? But the people you're working with, they don't do this, this, and this. They do every other thing except what you told them to do. And how do you feel when that happens? Once again, angry, frustrated, right? You are upset with those people, right? And it's very hard to get anything done. And you can imagine Moses at this point just thinking, if you people would just listen and do what you're told, simply go and get as much as you need for today, right? Not tomorrow, not for 2 weeks, today. Just do that, and we'll be fine. Right? But no, they don't listen to Moses, and Moses is getting mad. So this thing is starting to build steam. So now they start to gather it every morning, verse 21. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. Okay, so they just have what they need just for the day. And on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 4 quarts apiece, and all the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. So they're starting to get it, right? And he told them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil and set it aside for everything left over to keep until morning. Okay? So they're told to gather twice as much food on the 6th day. Why? Because the 7th day is going to be a day of rest. Okay? And what kind of rest is this? I should say, what's the point of this rest? Okay, it's to the Lord, right? It's for the Lord. This isn't necessarily just a day off for the sake of having a day off. They're not going to just, everybody jump in the car and run down to the Red Sea for the day. This is a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Okay, so this is a holy, something that is set apart. Rest, Sabbath, is what Sabbath means, is rest. And this holy rest is for the Lord. This is why we're doing it. Okay? And now, for these people who are coming out of Egypt, remember, what was their job in Egypt? They're slaves, right? I mean, how many days do slaves get off? You know, they probably have a pretty full schedule, right? And so they're probably used to working every single day. And in fact, at the end, not only did they have to work every single day, but the Pharaoh said, I want twice as much. Right? So they were basically being worked to death. And so here now, the Lord is saying, life here is going to be different. Remember, I'm the Lord who heals you. And so now he's giving them water, he's giving them meat, he's giving them bread, and now also he's giving them rest. Yes?
May I draw a blank? Sabbath, of course, God instituted it the seventh day he rested in creation. And then he come up in chapter 20 and we're going to bring it into the law. I don't remember, is this the introduction of the Sabbath concept to the masses?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
I don't recall it.
Yeah, you really, I mean, before this, you really don't see much about the Sabbath except for creation, right? And when do we see the Sabbath in creation?
Seventh day.
Okay, it's the seventh day, right? And so why do we have that seventh day? God rested, right? God stopped all his work. And when God was finishing his work, right, what did he say about his work? It's good, right? It's very good. Okay? So when God completed his work on the sixth day, I think that seventh day, so the seventh day God rested. Well, at that point, God is done with his work and everything is good. And I think that Sabbath day, that seventh day, that was the state of creation. That's the state in which the creation existed from that point on, was this state of Sabbath, this state of rest, this rest in the Lord. And so when Adam and Eve were walking the earth and they were walking the garden, they were, before sin entered into the world, the state of the world and their state of their relationship with God was something that was not only good, but it was something that was peaceful. And it was something that was restful, and it was something that was nourishing, and something that was life-giving. And so this idea of Sabbath is something that this is how God created the world, and this is the intent, actually, that God had for the world, and bringing it all into being, is that this was a state in which we would exist. And so now we see this idea being reintroduced, and it's reintroduced as God takes his community and starts to form this kingdom of priests, as he's going to call them in chapter 19. And this kingdom of priests that he's going to form, well, what's the state of that community going to be like? Or what does he want the state of that community to be like? Well, the state of that community, the state of his people, the state of his kingdom is one of rest, where God is in control and it is good. Right? And so this day that he's giving them is this holy Sabbath to the Lord. Well, they're going to be able to take this day of rest. And how is it that they're able to rest on that day? Why is it that they don't have to go and collect any food on that day?
Because God provided.
God provided twice as much, right? So God made it possible for them to experience this rest. And God made it possible for them to, in essence, take this time out and dedicate this time to the Lord. And experience him in this, and experience this good life in a new community. All right. Okay, so they set it aside until morning, just as Moses commanded, and it didn't stink or have maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord, and today you won't find any in the field. So it's really interesting that before, when they didn't listen to Moses, and they tried to store up extra days of the manna, it rotted. But here, when God tells them, store up an extra day, it doesn't rot. So it's really interesting to see that God is providing, and God is giving them what they need. They just have to listen to him, right? And so, for 6 days you will gather it, but on the seventh day of the Sabbath there will be none. Yet on the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, but they did not find any. It's like, yeah, they said there wasn't going to be any, right? But you still have people thinking, man, you know what? I got twice as much yesterday, and you know what? If I get out there today and I get to jump on it, I'll get another day in front of everybody else. You know, and I'll have another day stored up because I got these 2 days worth here, and this isn't rotting. So if I get another one, maybe that won't rot too. Yeah, and it's how people think, right? And secondly, people just don't listen.
Well, the other part of that is, why a certain amount given so that everybody has their fair share.
Yeah.
Somebody takes more, somebody goes without.
Yeah.
That's the other part of it.
Right. And so, then the Lord says to Moses in verse 28, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? Right? Good question, right? Good question. Yeah. Understand that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, and therefore on the sixth day he will give you 2 days' worth of bread. Each of you are to stay where you are. No one is to leave his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day.
That's the important thing right there is Jehovah talks to Moses, doesn't talk to the people. He talks to Moses, and Moses, hey, what can I do? You know, I gave them your word. It was theirs to obey or not to obey.
Mm-hmm.
What are you complaining to me for what they've done?
Yeah, well, there's a certain point that Moses does get frustrated. He gets fed up. Moses is the mediator between God and people. And so we see here people are still doubting, right? And I think we can understand why they doubt because, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's hard to trust the word, right? And maybe the hard's not the right word. But we have to trust God, and we can't always see exactly what God is doing. We don't always understand everything that the Lord is doing. Sometimes the commands that the Lord gives us are difficult and maybe even seemingly foolish. But we have to trust the Lord's word. And we have every reason to believe in the Lord's word, just as the Israelites had every reason to believe in the Lord's word. Because Jesus has been risen from the dead. And there's an interesting verse, 2 Peter, turn to 2 Peter, chapter 1. This is one of those verses that the first time I read it, or I should say the first time I saw it and comprehended it, I was just kind of blown away. But 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 says, His divine power has given us everything we need, or some translations say everything required, for life and godliness. Right? So, by His divine power, God has given us everything we need for life and godliness through the knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. So through knowing Jesus and through the knowledge of Him, we have everything we need for life, to live our lives, and to be godly. Right? So, if that's true, right, why don't we listen? Brandon?
Okay. With that, though, okay, that may be true, or no, not that may be true, that is true, but then we have to learn
Right.
then what that means and how to live that. Mm-hmm. You've been given it, but if you've never been given something before, you don't actually understand how to use it or anything with it.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. We have to learn, right? And I think that we have to see ourselves, just as the Israelites had to go through the wilderness, right? And they had to be transformed as a people. We have to be transformed also. And so, but also, just as the Israelites were tested, we're going to be tested. Because it is true. It's absolutely true that God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. And so we have to focus on that. And that's why Paul says in Philippians, he says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Right? Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Because when we have our minds set on earthly things, that's when we get into trouble. That's where we start thinking about the life before. And that's when we start to get drawn away from the Lord. But where we have to if we have our minds fixed on things above, things which are noble, things which are good, things which are righteous, those kinds of things, and we fix our minds on those things, then we can get through the testing. Because the testing is going to come. Right? And there's no doubt about that. And so,
Second Peter chapter 1 that you just read,
mm-hmm.
His divine power is everything we need for life and godliness. So, if our life is lacking in life or godliness, then how do we fix that? How do we fulfill that? Well, he goes on to tell us through our knowledge of him. So if we find our life sucks, it's because we don't know enough about Jesus. I mean, it's really that simple.
Right.
Right? I mean, if our life is falling short, either in our spiritual life or in just living life, then we don't know enough about Jesus. Because everything that we need for it comes through our knowledge of him, because God provides that.
Right.
You know, and if we could just get people to see that. Because you know people as well as I know people, life is never right. I have a friend, and when I talk to her, my job, my boss is, and I did everything right, my boss is good, and, my husband, he was it, and my kids, they was it. Well, your life is not what you want it to be. You know why? Because you don't know enough about Jesus. Really?
Yeah. Well, it's knowing him, right? Knowing the Lord.
Yeah.
And so as we go through our trials, we can learn to trust him. And I think Peter does go on to explain this, where he says, by these, right, that everything that is required for life and godliness is through the knowledge of him, through knowing Jesus, who has called us by his own glory. Where what was it the Israelites saw when the Lord appeared? They saw his glory. Right? Jesus appears by his own glory and goodness, and by these he has given us very great and precious promises. We have been given promises from the Lord, so that through them you may share in the divine nature, escaping the corruption that is in this world because of evil desire. And so what is it that gets us stuck in corruption? Our evil desires. And how is it that we share in the divine nature? And notice, that's a huge statement, by the way. Is what Peter's saying is that we, as people who come to the Lord, partake in him and in his nature. I've said this a couple times here recently, that what is required for us to have a relationship with God is a supernatural act, a supernatural transformation. We're supernaturally infused into the family of God. And so we've been given everything we need in order to participate in that through the knowledge of Jesus, through knowing Jesus, and to escape the corruption of this world of evil desires through the very great and precious promises that we have.
I think it can sound like I spoke to you soon.
Okay.
It's going to be it. Because there's so many things. Okay. So God has provided everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of Jesus. And that's not one thing. there's a lot of things
Yeah.
that we can learn about Jesus that will help us fulfill, so that we can have everything. You know, the passage in 2 Philippians where it talks about Jesus taking being in the very nature of God, and his humility and obedience, and being found in appearance of man, humbled himself and became obedient in death, even death on the cross.
Right.
Servant. They took the form of servant. So his servant, his humility, and his obedience. Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered. Well, there you go. There's our lessons.
Yeah. All right. I want to. I guess one more thing before we stop is thinking back about the Israelites when they're in this desperate situation and they grumble. And I was just thinking this morning about, well, what should they have done instead of grumbling? Okay. Pray. All right. Yeah, they could pray and they could wait on the Lord, praise the Lord. Right. Right. And so I think there's a distinction between grumbling and prayer. Because grumbling is just being negative about our situation. You know, as Roger so eloquently put it, this sucks, right? I mean, this stinks. Whatever I'm going through, horrible. Why me? All the things that we use to complain. But prayer is totally different. Prayer is actually what we should do, is where we cry out to God. We seek God's help. We seek God's help because we know Him. I know my situation, but I also know the Lord. And because I know the Lord, that whatever situation I'm in, I'm okay. And I can also realize that even if I'm not okay, it's still okay. Because it's not about me, it's about the glory of the Lord. So, but the enemy wants to get us to grumble. The enemy wants to get us grumbling about our situation. And I think that, well, I'll just ask you, how do we combat the tendency to grumble?
Well, Philippians 4:8.
Okay.
Set your minds on these things.
Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Another passage says, in all things giving thanks, which I think is the same thing, really. I give thanks to the Lord. I can be mindful of all the good things that the Lord has done for me. I can be mindful of all His very great and precious promises that He has given to me. And all these things. And I can dwell on those things and not dwell on earthly things or things that are affecting me negatively or what I might think is negative. Because ultimately the Lord is going to bring us through whatever situation may be.
And wouldn't it, just think how much fun it would have been, how exciting it would have been if the Israelites trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's army, if they got there and said, oh man, we're stuck. I wonder what God's going to do. Let's see what God's, I can't wait to see how God's going to get us out of this.
Yeah.
You know, and had that attitude rather than grumbling. And I think, you know, and some people get that because I think of Doreen. And I spoke to her a lot the last 2 years of her life, and the last year especially. And I think she knew, you know, her time was limited. But she was like that. When I talked to her and asked her how she was doing in the treatments and different things, and it would always be, and then I talked to her about Goober and Paul because she was working with them. Oh, I can't wait to see what God's going to do next. Mm-hmm. You know, she was always that way. I want to see what He's going to do next, rather than I can't help you. I got cancer. I'm stuck here. I got treatments. Them kids are going to take care of themselves. I just can't help you out. I just can't do it. But no, I can't wait to see what's going to be next. She was always that way. You know?
Yeah.
And that was encouraging. Mm-hmm. That was uplifting.
Right. All right. Anybody got anything else? Any other comments?
I just want to bring up
in 1613, where we were talking about the evening quail came up.
Yeah.
I covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew on the ground, all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a bit of fine, flaky substance. Now, you were sort of talking about the surface of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Is rock, right? Fine rock or something that. But can you imagine? So now that when there's dew and wasn't there something where they said the dew there? People have never really come up with an explanation of how the dew is, how it comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and how it appears, and yeah, here you got that happening, you know, in the wilderness, and then after the dew leaves, then you see this flaky substance like all over the ground.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that's our food. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I heard one person talk, or I read something that one person wrote about this, and they were talking about how actually in desert climates like this, the dew might actually be normal. And that, but once the dew evaporated, it leaves behind this. So what's happening is normal, but it leaves behind this bread, right? Which is supernatural. And so it would have also been interesting for people. I could see where people are thinking, you know what? I'm going to get out there at 4 o'clock in the morning before everybody else does, right? I'm thinking they're going to get ahead of the game, right? That there's going to, but no, it was the dew was falling, and it wasn't until the dew evaporated that there was the manna, right? So they still had to wait for the manna. But yeah, that would have been an incredible sight to see, and it probably would have been a lot like my translation says, "Fine as frost." You know, when you have frost in the fall. And you get up and you see that there's that crust. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been pretty amazing to see that. But it would have been also, you know, one of those situations where, and actually for what I read, it sounds like it's pretty good stuff, you know. And it'd be one of those things where you're sitting there once again being like, can you believe this? You know, we're eating bread that just shows up. And the Lord provides, yeah. So it's
better be good than be.
Yeah. Well, there will come a day. Actually, reading Numbers 21:5, there's another place where the people grumble because they're sick of manna. Right? It's like, I'm sick of this. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, and that's when they have the plague of snakes, actually. So. Anybody else?
It never occurred to me before was actually that the reason, or well, at least from what we know from Scripture, is that the reason for the giving of the bread and the quail is because that's what they asked for.
Meat and bread?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're comparing the lives of each. Because I always thought, like, well, why bread? Why meat? Like, why would it be those two substances to the Lord that could give literally anything?
Yeah.
Because that's what they asked for.
Mm-hmm.
I never got that before.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the Lord gave them what they asked for and what they needed, and it's
They're saying it sarcastically.
yeah. Well, that's kind of like Numbers 21 too, when they grumble about when they're sick of quail and they're sick of bread, and they start to say, "Well, remember, wouldn't it have been great to go back to Egypt when they get the plague of snakes?" It's kind of like, well, do you want to go back to Egypt? Here you go. Yeah. So, all right. Any prayer requests? Anybody got anything?